As I said, we're going to start very basic as far as talking about dreams and just where they're at in Scripture, just to look at it from a scriptural point of view. In Job chapter 33, it states, and indeed, God speaks once or twice. No one notices it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when sound sleep falls on men while they slumber in their beds, he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. Job 33, 14 through 16. So very clearly it states, God speaks not once but twice, in a dream, in the vision of a night, when sound sleep falls on men. So they're making the distinction that dreams happen while we're sleeping, while they slumber in their beds. Then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. You know, this whole idea of sealing their instruction, there's probably a lot to that, probably a lot more than what we have time to unravel fully. I think partially it means that there's sometimes that he gives you a dream and he seals things inside of that dream. So the instruction of the dreams is sealed in you. It's with you from the point you've had the dream. You walk away from it and the instructions are just sealed. I also think there's times that it means that you wake up from a dream and you know that the dream was very impactful. There were things that happened, but you can't recall them. I think God seals some of those things sometimes in the dream, because if we remembered what he showed us in the dream, we may mess it up in real life. He may be showing you some things that are going to happen future. He may be opening some things up to you, and then he seals it inside of that dream. It's in your spirit. Your spirit's aware of it. Your spirit's holding it, but it's your conscious mind can't recall it. Does anybody know who had the first dream in all of Scripture? First recorded dream? A guy named Abimelech. Abimelech's dream is the very first dream that is recorded in all of Scripture. So the interesting part of that one is that Abimelech doesn't believe in God, or he doesn't at least worship that God. Abimelech has a dream, and the whole story is, right, Abraham is passing through their area, and Abraham's like, it won't be good. They could kill us. So Abraham tells Sarah, say you're my sister. And so Abimelech comes, he says, this is my sister. And Abimelech takes Sarah into his bed that night. And while he's asleep, God comes to him and says, you're going to die because you've taken another man's wife into your bed. Right. And Abimelech's like, I didn't do anything. And God said, no, I didn't. I prevented you from doing anything. But if you take her back and give her back to her husband, he'll pray for you and you'll be okay. So that's the very first dream in all of Scripture. So a few things there. You can dream before you know God. God can speak to them in their dreams before they are saved or before they have a relationship with him. Right? He can open their ears and talk to them. So this is not just limited to people who have given their life to Jesus or who in a relationship with Jesus. He can speak in all ways. As we all know, he speaks to everybody right before we get saved. If he couldn't speak to us, if we couldn't hear him, then none of us would get saved in the first place. There's different kinds of dreams, right? You see up here, it talks about nature of dream. There's a metaphoric nature. There's a literal nature. Both of those are represented in Scripture. If you go look at Matthew 1:20, it's when an angel appears to Joseph and Mary has told him the whole story about, I'm going to get pregnant. We're not married. And an angel appears to Joseph and says, hey, take her as your wife. Everything that's happening is okay. And so Joseph goes ahead and gets married to Mary. And they go to Bethlehem, you know the whole story. Again, in Matthew 2:13, another angel comes in a dream to Joseph and tells Joseph, take your wife and your kid and go to Egypt because they're going to kill you. Because at that point, Herod was searching out all kids that were below the age of 2 and killing them all. So an angel shows up to Joseph in a dream and says, get your wife and kid and leave. There's somebody that I've talked to before. He had a dream one night in his bed. He was laying in his bed. He falls asleep. And then in his dream, he sees himself leaving his body and he's hovering over the earth. And there's a man standing there next to him. And the man points at the west coast of the earth and of the U.S. and says, move there and live, stay there and stay here and die. And it says it 3 times. And then next thing he knows, he's back in his bed. There's no interpretation needed in that, right? Move to the west coast, you stay alive. Stay on the east coast, you die. It's pretty easy to understand. An angel shows up to Joseph in a dream and says, hey, get your family, go to Egypt because somebody's trying to kill you. There's nothing metaphoric about that. No symbolism, nothing like that. Again, in Matthew 27, you see it with Pilate. It's when Jesus and Barabbas are there. And Pilate's talking about, who do you want me to release? And everybody's saying, release Barabbas. And so what happens with Pilate's wife? She comes out and says, hey, don't have anything to do with us. I had a dream last night and it was very troubling, all on account of this man. So don't have anything to do with this at all. As we all know, Pilate tells them, I'll give you Barabbas back and, I'll do whatever you want with Jesus. And then he washes his hand and says, but my hands are clean of this. Very literal dreams, right? The third one's a little bit of an assumption, but she understood it very clearly. She had some kind of a dream, and something in her dream told her, don't have anything to do with this guy's death. Some of the metaphoric dreams, those are the ones that most of us know about. The ones that we hear the stories about a lot. Metaphor just simply means it's a form of language that states that one thing is another thing. We know with Jesus, right? It says that Jesus is the Lion of Judah. He's not like a lion. He doesn't resemble a lion. He is the Lion of Judah. He's the Prince of Peace, right? He's the great physician. Those are all metaphors to describe who he is. They're aspects and parts of his character and nature that it's describing. And it's not like he's like those things. He is those things. You see it in the parables a lot when Jesus was telling stories, right? He would tell them about sheep. He would talk about fish. Why was he talking about sheep and fish? He was talking to shepherds. He was talking to fishermen. He was using pictures of things that made sense to them. He was using images of things that were relevant to their life at that time. When he talked about fish and fishing, that was relevant. That's where most of them made their living. When he was talking about sheep, a lot of them made their living in sheep. When he was talking about lambs and lambs being sacrificed, that was all something very common to them. It made a lot of sense to them. They had reference for it. So dreams, lots of times, will have lots of metaphor. They will have pictures of things that aren't what they look like in the dream. It'll be something that you see in the dream, but it's not what it appears to be. It's something that means something else. It's a picture of something, but it means that it is something else in another form. In Genesis 37:5, Joseph has a dream and he runs out to tell his brothers. And it says he ran out to tell his brothers about the dream, and his brothers hated him even more after the dream. So they were aware that he was aware they hated him already. Right, he's dad's favorite. He gets to stay in the house. They're all out in the field working. He gets a nice, pretty coat with all the colors on it. He gets to learn a bunch of stuff. They're all out working with sheep. And then he comes out and says, hey, I had a dream and y'all are all going to bow down to me. It didn't go over real well. Sometimes it's good to use discernment in sharing dreams, to be aware of the audience that you're sharing your dream with. I'm not saying that Joseph did something he wasn't supposed to do, because we all know how that turned out, but the impact of it was not so positive on his life in the moment. But Joseph says, I saw 11 sheaves. We were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf stood up and also remained standing. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Another interesting thing about this is that it doesn't say that anybody came out to interpret the dream for them. It doesn't say that Joseph was like, so let me tell you what this means. All the brothers all at once say, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? And they hated him even more. In that moment, all 11 of the brothers understood what he was saying. That comes to the point that this is something that was passed down to them. There was probably a lot of metaphor. There was probably a lot of pictures in their language. They sat and they talked about it. Even in a lot of cultures right now, dreams are still very highly valued. People sit around and talk about their dreams. They put a lot of weight on their dreams. It's not just something flippant, some weird activity in the night that they just try to pass off. They spend time talking about it. They spend time focusing on it. So it was probably passed down generationally to generationally, so that when they talked about dreams, there was just understanding that came with it. They didn't need to seek out the dream interpreter. It was just something that was a part of their culture. You see it again with the baker and the cupbearer in Genesis 40, right? He's in prison, and he's talking to the baker and the cupbearer. They've been thrown in prison. And this interesting part, they say, we've had a dream and there's no one that's here to interpret it. And Joseph says to them, do not interpretations belong to God? That is a big statement. Even if you get into a point of interpreting dreams, the reality is interpretations are not within you. They don't belong to you. Interpretations belong to God. So when there's metaphor, when there's weird stuff going on, the reality is all of it is revelation. It is all stuff that God is revealing to you. He's unraveling mystery to you. He's taking things that seem weird and seem like they're hard to understand, and he's unraveling it for you and making it very understandable. So Joseph says, tell me the dreams, and they tell him there's a basket of bread on my head, and these crows come and they eat the baskets of bread. And then the other one, 3 baskets of bread, and the other one says he sees 3 vines, and he picks the grapes, and off the 3 vines, it's budding and it blossoms, and blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And so Joseph tells them, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you back up and restore you to your office, and you'll put Pharaoh's cup back in his hand. Just keep me in mind when you do this. And so the baker says, that turned out really well, so I'm going to tell him my dream. Said I had 3 baskets of bread on my head, and there were these crows that came and ate the baskets of bread. And he's like, "Oh, in 3 days you're going to have your head cut off." So didn't go so well in the same direction. So the 3 bunches of grapes were 3 days. The 3 baskets of bread were 3 days. Does anybody have a guess as to why he told the cupbearer or the baker that he was going to die in 3 days? What in that dream gave him the idea that he was going to be killed in that? Anybody have a guess right now? Bread is his living, right? That's what he does. He's a baker. He makes bread for the Pharaoh. So I saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of bread on my head, and in the top basket, some of all kinds of baked food for Pharaoh. The birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. So the reality is he had everything that he made his living on. His identity was on his head, and there were birds that were coming and eating it. So it was being devoured. His identity, everything that he was being eaten and taken away. The cupbearer in his dream, he's squeezing grapes back into the cup, and he's handing the cup back to Pharaoh, which means he's going to be restored back to his position, right? He's putting the cup back in his hand. There weren't birds there. The cup wasn't being poured out on the ground. The dream is pointing to the fact that he's back in his position, giving his cup back to Pharaoh again. There's interesting, the 2 people that everybody knows of dream interpreters in scripture, Joseph and Daniel. They're the 2 most common. Some of the biggest stories revolving around their life are the fact that they interpreted dreams for leadership, for rulers of nations. Interpreting dreams will put you in front of some really interesting people sometimes. Everybody dreams. That's just the reality. There's a lot of people that say, I don't dream. Reality is everybody's dreams. They've scientifically studied it. Everybody dreams. A lot of people don't remember their dreams. They wake up and their dreams leave them immediately, but everybody dreams. If you get really good at this, or get to a point of gaining some favor in this, you can get into some really interesting conversations and interesting people. Random people will just come up sometimes and just be like, "Oh, I had this dream last night." It happens at work quite frequently. People used to come into my office, and we would just be talking about something random. They'd be like, "Oh, I had this dream." And they would just feel compelled to tell me their dream for some reason. They had no idea that I teach classes on dreams. They don't have any idea that I did anything with dreams. They would just feel compelled to tell me their dream for some reason. And sometimes I told them what they meant. So Pharaoh has the dream, right? He sees 7 cows, 7 fat cows that are out in the field eating. He sees 7 skinny cows come up out of the Nile, and they eat the 7 fat cows. He sees the 7 heads of grain and the 7 burnt heads of grain come up out, and they eat the 7 good, healthy heads of grain. And so nobody can interpret the dream, and he's really troubled by it. So finally, the cupbearer remembers, like 3 years later, like, "Hey, there's this guy in prison that interpreted my dream. He might be able to help you." So they bring Joseph out. So Joseph comes out and says, "Hey, so this is what's going to happen. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine." And the interesting part is, after this, what you hear Joseph say is Joseph starts to tell Pharaoh what he should do, right? He starts saying, so what you should do is, in the 7 years of plenty, you should take all the food and store it up so that in the 7 years of famine, you have it, and you can disperse it out to everybody. You make sure everybody's taken care of. That's not in the dream. The dream's not saying anything at all about that. So what will happen sometimes with dreams is the dream will have the details and have specific stuff in it. You'll interpret the dream. Sometimes God will add wisdom and revelation on top of the dream, and you can speak that. It's usually best to make that really clear to people when you do that. The dream is saying this. I also think God is telling you this, so that when you're saying it, that you're making it very clear. This is what the dream says. Now, this is all stuff that I think God is revealing outside of what the dream says. Again, it was interesting because when Joseph comes before Pharaoh, it says, "I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And Joseph answers and says, "It has nothing to do with me. God will give Pharaoh an answer for his own good." So the interpretation was not for the good of Joseph to get favor with Pharaoh. The interpretation was not because Joseph was, incredibly holy or nothing like that. The dream, God gave the interpretation to Joseph so that he could speak it to Pharaoh because it was for Pharaoh's good. It was Pharaoh's dream. The interpretation was for his good. So a lot of times when you're doing this, you got to remember in the interpretation part, it's God's way of loving the person that you're talking to when they're talking to you about a dream. You're interpreting their dream and you're opening up some kind of mystery. 1 Corinthians 14, it says that one who speaks in a tongue edifies himself, but one who prophesies edifies the church, because a tongue is not understandable. There's no understanding that comes with it. Dreams are like that, right? Dream is like a tongue in the middle of the night. You lay down, you see a bunch of crazy stuff happening. You have no idea what it means, and you do not feel edified waking up from it. You're just like, there was something impactful. I know there was something weighty in this, but I don't understand it. And without understanding, the edification and love part can't come. And so you can feel hints of it, but you will never feel the full release of that until there's interpretation. Some interpretations don't come instantly. Some of them that you have to wait, and it takes sometimes years. There's some dreams that I'm still waiting on that I had maybe 15, 20 years ago that I keep going back every now and then. And I'm just like, God, I think I understand what this part of it is, but I still don't understand this part. And the understanding of it has changed over time, and God keeps opening up parts of it. And I've had dreams, sometimes I've had them, and I'll be walking through somewhere, just not even thinking about the dream. And all of a sudden the idea of what the dream meant will just pop into my head instantly. I'm like, oh, I know what that meant now. So sometimes it just takes time, but it says that it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of a king to search the matter out. God sometimes hides things just to give us an opportunity to operate as royalty, right? He hides things so that we have an opportunity to operate in a kingly manner and search something out. Non-biblical dreams. So there's lots of dreams that keep happening right now. There was a guy named Polycarp. Polycarp was one of John the Beloved's disciples. He laid down to go to sleep one night. He laid down, he had a dream. He saw his pillow burst into flames. He woke up the next day and he said, I'm going to be burned to death in 3 days. And in 3 days, he was put on a stake, and they put fire all around him, and the fire couldn't touch him. It was just encircling him. And he said a bunch of stuff he felt like he needed to say. And at the end of it, the fire engulfed, and he was burned in fire. Elias Howe, the man who invented the sewing machine. Does anybody know how he got the idea for the sewing, how he finished the sewing machine? So Elias Howe had built a sewing machine. He was completely stuck because he didn't know how to get the thread into the needle. He didn't know how that was going to work. So he had been trying to work on it for a while, and he laid down one night and went to sleep, and he had a dream, and there were these natives that were walking around him in a circle, and they had spears in their hand, and the spears were moving up and down. And he looked, and in the end of the spears, there was a hole in the end of the spear. And he woke up and said, that's it. And so he put a hole in the needle, and that's how he invented the sewing machine. Abraham Lincoln dreamed about his own death a few days before he died. He had a dream that he was walking through the White House, and everybody was sad and crying. And he walked into a room, and there was a casket, and he said, what's happened? And somebody said, the president's been killed. And then I think it was like 2 or 3 days later, he got assassinated. Before every major event in the Civil War, he would go into meetings, and it's documented. He would go into meetings with his cabinet members, and he would say, who has any kind of big news or any news to share? And nobody would say anything. And he would say, I've had a dream. I had a dream this week that I was on a boat, and there was no oar, there was no rudder, but it's a vast ocean, and I'm standing there just completely hopeless in this vast ocean. And he said, I've had this dream every time that there's some major event that's about to happen. And so he would have that dream in a certain week, and sometime during that week, some major event in the Civil War would occur. And it was a reoccurring dream that he would have over and over and over again. So he would tell them when nobody had any big news, and he had that dream, he would say, there's going to be big news this week. Jack Nicklaus, y'all heard of him, famous golfer. He was playing, and he was having a lot of trouble with his swing. His game was going really not well. He went to sleep one night, and in his dream, he saw himself playing golf, and he was using a grip that he had never used before, and he was hitting the ball straighter than he had ever hit it. He woke up the next morning, went out and tried the grip, and that's where he came up with his swing, and that's when his career took off. He dreamed about his golf swing in a dream. He saw it all in a dream, and he came out, tried it, and it worked out. Paul McCartney, y'all know, ever heard of him? The song Yesterday, that tune came to him in a dream. The song Let It Be. He had a dream about his mom who had passed away, and his mom was standing talking to him in the dream, and she said, don't worry about everything, it's going to work out. And then she made a statement, said, let it be. And he woke up and said, I know it's supposed to be something. So he woke up and wrote the song Let It Be. A lot of people, Mary Shelley, I think, is who wrote Frankenstein. That was a series of dreams that she had. She woke up and wrote them down and turned it into the book Frankenstein. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde was a dream that he had. He woke up and wrote it down and turned it into a book. Sold, however many millions of copies at this point. Lots of dreams, lots of reasons for dreams, all kinds of crazy things. A lot of Einstein's ideas and theories, the string theory, Einstein, the theory of relativity, those came through dreams. He woke up and he had a dream that just opened his mind up to it. In Isaiah 55:8, it says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways than your ways, my thoughts than your thoughts. Isaiah 55:8-9. So God shows us some stuff in dreams. I believe he shows us some stuff in dreams because if he tried to talk to us about it while we were awake, our mind would get in the way. because he's telling us things that are beyond our mental capacity. Sometimes he's telling us things that are beyond us, that are deeper than what we can dream or imagine at the moment. And while you're asleep, most of the time your conscious mind is deactivated. And so God as spirit is speaking to your spirit, and he can talk to you about things without your filtering and all the stuff in your head getting in the way of it. He can open things up and he can reveal things to you. Now, again, I talked about in Proverbs when it says that it's the glory of God to conceal a matter and the glory of the king to search it out. He reveals those things that are deeper than what we can think, thoughts that are beyond us. Sometimes he hides them in metaphor because he wants you to search it out, right? There's something very royal, very kingly about going and searching those out. Some visions are literal, some visions are metaphoric, like the nature. You see that with, is it Peter that's on the roof in Acts, and he goes into a trance and he has a vision and he sees the animals being bounced up and down on the sheet. And God says, go kill and eat. And he says it 3 times, and Peter keeps saying, but I've never defiled myself in that way. And God says, I'm sending somebody to the door. And when he gets there, like you're supposed to go with him, I've sent him. And was it Paul or Peter? I can't remember right now, but the guy comes to the door and says, God sent me here. You're supposed to come to my house and teach. But it was a vision that he had. It was very metaphoric. He was very confused because he was waiting on dinner to be finished. He was hungry and he went on the roof to pray. And he saw a vision about animals, and it was unclean animals to him. And God said, go kill and eat. So some visions can be metaphoric and some can be very literal. Yeah, so that's a metaphor, right? Driving a tent peg in the ground. That's a very biblically understood metaphor. You drive a tent peg in, you're putting authority over something. You're declaring it's like, I have authority in this area. I'm taking like rule over this region or this area. So it's a very biblical understanding of a metaphor. God could have shown you a vision of driving a stake in the ground out here next to the pavilion. That would have been extremely literal. It could have been metaphoric in the fact that you're declaring authority over something or gaining ownership of it, but it would also have been very literal that you're getting this specific piece of land. It can be mixed. There's lots of people on the vision seeing side that you can have visions, you can see things, and you can see things play out before people. They say that Paul Cain used to go when he would stand up to speak, that he would look out into the crowd and he would see like a note card over everybody's head that would have their name, their address, the date they were born on, like hanging over their heads, like it was a vision, right? But it was very literal. What he was seeing was very literal information. In Daniel 22 and 28, just want to show you this because Daniel had the same understanding of Joseph did. He's talking to the king here. And he says, he's talking about God, and he said, it is he who reveals profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells in him. And then in verse 28, he says, however, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. So Daniel had the understanding again, it was God that light dwells in. He knows what is in the darkness, and he reveals profound and hidden things. He also said, however, there's a God in heaven who reveals secrets. Daniel didn't say, I know dark and hidden mysterious things. He didn't say, I unravel mysteries that come from heaven. He said, God does these things, right? And God did these things and spoke to him on behalf of Nebuchadnezzar, spoke to him on behalf of Darius. Joseph had the same understandings, right? Do not interpretations belong to God? God will unravel this mystery for you because it's for your good. So we can never get away from this. There have been a lot of people in the psychological world, Freud, a couple other people that came up with dream interpretation, right? But it's all very psychological. They are processing the information out. They're using their mind to determine what everything means and how it ties back to it's always something tied back to your history, your past, right? And they always bring it into it's something that your psyche is doing because of some event that occurred in your background, but it's their ability to process the information. There's no reliance on God is the one who reveals mysteries. So when we're doing this from a biblical perspective, it's very important to make that delineation. This interpretation is coming from God. I'm allowing God to unravel this mystery. I'm allowing God to take these elements and to unravel them and to reveal to me what the secrets are. Let's do something real fast. I want you to break up into groups of 2, pair up with somebody. I need one group of 3. And this is all I'm asking you to do. You've only got 5 minutes, so you got to talk quickly. If it was very long, you got to condense it. I want you to share the very first dream you ever remember having with who you're paired up with. If that's yesterday and that's the only dream you can recall, that's fine. I remember dreams that I had when I was 3 and 4 years old that stick with me. If your dream was yesterday and that's the only one you can recall, no, I'm good with that. Just whatever the very first dream is you can remember having. Okay. We're going to take about 5 minutes to do that. Don't interpret. Don't try to give understanding. Just share the dream. Just sharing a dream. Was everybody able to recall a dream? Was there anybody that was not able to recall a dream?
Just recall like something general.
Okay. Yeah. Like the feeling or overall kind of sense of the dream.
Yes.
Yep. That's fine. That happens too. I was eating breakfast with Rick this morning and I don't even remember what he was talking about. And at some point it just popped into my head about a dream that I'd had last night. And then I remembered I'd had the dream probably 2 or 3 times this week. And we weren't talking anything that would even closely relate to the dream. We've talked about dreams, right? So dreams come from God. That's really easy. God, you're laying down to go to sleep and you fall asleep and God gives you a dream. And, people have done studies about REM cycles and when dreams occur and when you're the most active in dreams. I have friends that have tested themselves. They have set alarms throughout the night to wake up at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, to see when they remember their dreams the best. And then they actually set the half hours after that. So if they seem to remember their dreams best at 4 o'clock, they would set a half hour at 4:30 to see if it was better or worse at 4:30 to remember their dreams. So there's times of sleep there's times when you wake up and you're most able to remember your dreams. Lee wakes up every morning about 5:30, and when she gets out of bed at 5:30, every time she wakes up, I wake up and I almost always remember my dream. If I don't get up and write it down or record it in some way and I lay back down, as soon as I lay back down, it's gone. There's just reality. There's sometimes that your body works better. Some people that's later, some people that's earlier. It's hard to tell. So the dream part's easy. You lay down, you go to sleep. There are some practical things you can do to make that easier, right? The way that you prepare to go to bed. If you let yourself get overly tired, you're going to bed really late, you're just wearing yourself out every day. Remembering your dreams is not going to be as easy in the morning. If you're going to sleep when your body's telling you to go to sleep, it's usually easier to remember your dreams. The kind of atmosphere that you're creating before you lay down. If you're reading a bunch of stuff that cause anxiety, stress, you're looking at a lot of things, there's, lots of activity, input, right as you're laying down, you're probably not going to remember your dreams very well because your mind is going to be flooded with a bunch of other stuff. Your mind is trying to process and get all that stuff that is backlogged, all the backlogged cues of your mind of information, all that's trying to clear out. So when you wake up in the morning, it's hard to then just immediately remember a dream. Kind of environment, again, what you do, time you wake up, those all play factors. The kind of food that you're eating, kind of chemicals that you're taking in. Some people have to be on medication. Medications can affect your dreams, can affect your ability to remember dreams. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. Biggest thing is try to create a peaceful environment before you go to sleep. If you want to remember dreams, try to create a peaceful environment. Even pray and specifically ask God, help me to remember my dream in the morning. You may only remember bits and pieces of it. You may only remember I had a dream and there was a purple bunny rabbit in the dream. If that is all you remember, wake up and write down purple bunny rabbit was in my dream last night. You may not remember anything else about the dream at all. But what it says is he who has little will be given more, right? And he who has a lot, even what he has will be taken away. Right? If you don't take care of the little, then what you have will be, if you don't take care of the lot, it'll be taken away from you. If you have a little and you take care of it, then you'll be given more. Despise the day of small beginning, right? If all you have is, there was a yellow flower in my dream last night, wake up and write it down. The next night you wake up, you may say there was a yellow flower and there was a blue house. And then the next night you may remember 3 things about your dream. It may take a couple weeks to get there, but just be diligent with the things that you have. Put value on even the very small things and it'll expand. So very practical stuff that you can do just to remember that. When you wake up and recording your dreams, a lot of people used to keep a dream journal next to their bed. They would wake up and they would write their dream down. They had a journal that was just specifically for their dreams. I knew people back before all the smartphones, they would wake up and they would call and leave a voicemail for themselves on their phone because they didn't want to write anything down. So they would call and leave a voicemail for themselves. Now with smartphones, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can open Google Docs. You can create a memo to yourself. You can send yourself an email, whatever you want to do, whatever works best for you. Just record it in some way, put value on something and it will grow. We will get into a little bit of the interpretive kind of process. There's not really an order to it, but just kind of the steps of what you do. It's always good to try to summarize your dream. It's good to share the summary. Sharing the summary can be you speaking the summary back out loud to yourself, just you summarizing it back out to yourself. And as you're doing that, sometimes as you're saying it, something else will pop into your head of like, oh, wait, I forgot this part. Or, oh, wait, I've added all these things into my summary, and now I'm realizing that they don't do anything to add any detail to this dream. Just by sharing the summary, even just out loud to yourself sometimes, it helps you kind of figure out what you need to focus on. Interpreting the dream / the elements. We'll get into how to dissect and pull all the elements out and look at them individually so that you're not looking at the dream as a whole. Some of you probably have like 2 or 3, dreams that are like full feature length films a night. That's hard, right? When you get into trying to interpret that, break out elements, it's hard to figure out what you should focus on when your dreams are that detailed and that long. So we'll go over some stuff that's just very practical ways to do that. Determine the nature and the scope of your dream. So nature is either going to be metaphoric or literal. Scope is going to be internal or external. Pharaoh had a dream about 7 cows and 7 heads of wheat. That was an external dream. Had absolutely nothing to do with Pharaoh. Like, it wasn't about Pharaoh individual life. It was about Egypt as a whole, right? So that was an external dream. It was about the things, and of course it impacted him, but it was about things outside of him. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about a giant tree. That was an internal dream. That dream was about Nebuchadnezzar. It revolved around him and it revolved around his life. So you will have dreams that are internal. You will have dreams that are external. So nature is metaphoric and literal, and scope is either going to be internal or external. So it's either about your life or about things outside of your life. Some dreams you have can be metaphoric and literal. There can be aspects of both. Some dreams you have can have internal impact and can have external impact. But most of the time, especially for scope, you're going to be able to tell it's either internal or external. A good way to tell that is when you are going through this step of summarizing the dream and sharing the summary. If you hear yourself saying I, me, my a whole lot, that's probably an internal dream. If when you're repeating this dream to someone and you're saying my house, my car, my cat, my dog, my kids, my hat, my clothes, my bag, I was walking, I was washing dishes, I was turning the lights on. When you hear a lot of that I, me, my, it's probably an internal dream because the focus of it is around the activity that you're doing. We get into finding the source. There's a few different sources, of course. God can give dreams. We can have dreams that come from ourselves, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a few minutes. And then, of course, there's negative sources, right? There's an enemy and there's demonic forces and there's a lot of negative things that can come in and can infiltrate dreams. I don't personally believe that they can make dreams, but I think they come in and they distort dreams. I don't think he can create, but I think he's really good at distorting. So you can have dreams that get distorted. You can have dreams that get, maybe the purpose is supposed to be one thing and it just gets completely sidetracked into something else. So we'll look into that a little bit more though. Then you are going to categorize your dream. Categories, there's a lot, and we'll get into this a little bit more. Best way to think about categories is it's kind of like a genre. You've all heard of like the movie genres. If you were to go to an action movie thinking that it's going to be romance, you may be sitting there in the first 15 minutes of that movie really confused about what's happening. If you have a dream and you come to the idea that, oh, this is an invention dream, but everything in the dream is pointing to, I don't know, like a warning, you could end up being very confused when you were trying to interpret that because you've decided that this is the purpose of it. The meaning or the weight behind this is because God's trying to give me purpose or let's say purpose. God's trying to reveal my purpose to me, and the purpose of this dream or the idea of this dream is all in that direction. And the dream is giving you warning about something. It could be very confusing trying to get the interpretation because you've completely tried to get in one direction to get to some end, and that's not the end the dream came for. So we'll talk about these a little bit more in detail. And then you're going to do a rough interpretation. Sometimes rough interpretation is all you really need. If you are sharing someone else's interpretation and you have time to do it, they've emailed it to you and they've not like put you on the spot like right there in the moment, it's good to do a rough interpretation and then to clean that up and to do like a final interpretation where you actually make that a little bit more understandable to them. And Mostly I wanted to focus on some of these so that when you're at home having dreams and you have crazy stuff going on, that you can find ways to start pulling them apart very practically and not feel so overwhelmed with a bunch of mystery and a bunch of things that are just don't make sense to you. And you can pull them apart, look at them in a little bit smaller pieces and just pursue God on smaller pieces. And then you can start to put the pieces together. And you'll grow in it as you do it. Just the reality of what I've learned with dreams is that one of the things that you have to get really good at with dreams and interpretation is you have to start and actually live in the place of, I'm going to mess this up a lot. You're going to fail at it. It's just the reality. And you're going to have metaphor, you're going to have things that show up and you are not going to know what they mean. It doesn't matter if you've done this for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, you're going to see metaphors and you are not going to know what they mean. And you just have to constantly be in this place of God is the one who unravels mysteries. God is the one who holds interpretations. And you have to be okay that if you do something wrong, just be open to it. I'm sorry that I've looked at it now and I realize that I completely missed that element of that dream. And this is what I think God's saying. And it's fine. Or if somebody comes back and says, hey, you gave me that dream interpretation and it just doesn't go right, just be humble about it, right? I'm sorry. I was trying to hear God on that. Right. And sometimes it is right and they just don't want to accept it's right because they're in this place, right? This dream was about purpose and you interpreted this dream all about like my self-condition and you weren't talking about my purpose of my life. So they just don't want to hear what you have to say. And sometimes we just get it wrong. I'm starting to think that spiritual maturity in this is being able to fail at this and keep going. What it looks like is that the people that aren't willing to fail and keep going are the ones that are going to stay in an immature state of this. If you're only going to do the dreams and interpret dreams and look at dreams that you know that you can interpret, you're never going to grow in this. John Wimber used to say all the time that faith is a 4-letter word and it's spelled RISK. He was talking about in order to have faith, to operate in faith, you have to step out in some kind of a risk. With dream interpretation especially, you're going to get dreams, you're going to get metaphors, you're going to see stuff that you don't understand. And if you stay in a really safe place in it all the time and never step into risk, your growth is going to be non-existent or extremely slow. Summarizing the dream in Daniel 7, it's Daniel 7 verse 1. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and vision of his mind as he lay on his bed, and he wrote the dream down and he told the following summary of it. Or literally when it's saying that he told the following summary of it, what it's literally saying is he ordered out the leading parts. So he didn't record everything that he saw. He took the most weighty, the heaviest parts, and he summarized the dream to the parts. That's a good thing to do. I have people come up sometimes and they're like, hey, I've had this dream. Do you have a minute? And they're like, I walked out of my house and there was green grass and there was a gray cement sidewalk and there was a blue car in the driveway and the sky was blue and there was a red bird in the tree and the tree had brown bark and it had green feathers and they just go on and on and on and on. And then really the reality of the dream is God was telling you, that you were going to have a good day because the sun was extremely bright and yellow. And he said, your day's going to be full of joy. The fact that there was a tree and a blue car, like none of that mattered. Joseph, he says he summarized the dream. And if you read on in chapter 7, he said, I was looking in my vision by night and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And he talks about the 4 beasts that came up out of the sea and how one of them had 4 heads. But he doesn't go into everything, right? He's not talking about how big the waves are and there's water splashing and right. He just talks about the beast. Those were the heavy parts. He talks about what the beast looked like. He talked about what the beast's face looked like because those parts felt heavy to him. So you have to use discernment in this. In Hebrews 5:14, it says, solid food is for the mature who through practice have trained their senses to discern that which is good and evil. So you have to practice discernment in this. So as you're reading, you're summarizing this dream, you're sharing the summary. Hopefully when you're sharing the summary, you'll feel some discernment. And as you practice it, it'll get better. You'll get better at it. You're sharing the summary and you start realizing, I just spent a whole lot of time talking about how green the grass was and it doesn't matter at all. Like there's no weight to it at all. For me, people are telling me dreams and it's sometimes when they're telling me dreams, it's like I can see what they're telling me in different colors. Weighty things will almost appear red as they're talking about it. There will be things that will appear kind of yellow in dreams, and it's kind of like an element of the dream, and it maybe has impacted the dream, but it's not a weighty aspect of the dream. And so sometimes as you hear people tell dreams, you can just feel it. They'll say something about the dream, and you're like, I don't know what that element means, but I know it's really important. I don't know why you were driving your car from the back seat, but it feels really important that you're in the back seat. And so you pick up on the parts that feel like they're really important parts. God is light. And so any dream that God gives, there's going to be full light. So the enemy he doesn't do things in light. He does things in darkness. He hides. So lots of times dreams that are coming from a negative source, those dreams will be either black and white, or they'll be very muted colors. It'll be like a very muted blue, or it'll be a very muted like brown, a very muted kind of grayish colors, like a grayish tone to everything. He doesn't do things in light. Most nightmares people have, when you talk to them about it, everything is dark in the dream. It's dark out. It's dark in the house. The person chasing them is in black. It's all dark. Some of those times in those dreams, if you can get people to a point that we won't get into lucidity much today, but where they're walking through lucidity, you can, in those dreams of being chased by things, you can look around and sometimes you'll find an object that's like a stick on the ground that's like glowing red, and everything else in the dream is extremely dark. And if you pick that stick up, it's an element that God's put in the dream for you to fight back with, because God does things in light, and where there's light, there's color. Because color is only a reflection of light. It just has to do with how the wavelengths of light and how intense the wavelengths of the light are and how they reflect back to our eyes. We'll talk about the negative sources here in a minute a little bit more. I don't want to get too sidetracked. Daniel, an example of an interpretation. Daniel in 2:36, he's telling the king about his dream. And he says, "And now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the honor. Wherever the sons of mankind live, or animals of the field, or birds of the sky, he has handed them over to you and has made you ruler over all of them. After this, another kingdom will arise inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. There will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, just as iron smashes and crushes everything, so that like iron, it crushes, it will smash and crush all these things. And in it you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have within it some of the toughness of iron, since you have the iron mixed with the common clay. And just as you saw the toes, the feet, partly of iron and partly of pottery, some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be fragile. In that you saw the iron mixed with the common clay, they will combine with one another and in their descendants, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not adhere to pottery. And in the days of those kings, the king, God of heaven, will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever." So this whole dream, right? Nebuchadnezzar's had this dream, and he sees this great statue, and it's got a head of gold and a chest of silver, and I think its stomach was bronze, and then its legs were iron, and then its feet were like iron and clay together. And then he sees a rock get cut out without any hands. The rock gets cut out and the rock gets thrown and it smashes the statue, right? And so when Daniel's interpreting this, he's hitting all the major points. He's hitting the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar. He's hitting that there's another kingdom that's coming after him that's going to be inferior to him. It's going to be silver. And then there's another kingdom that's going to be as strong as iron, but it's going to be mixed with iron and pottery, right? There's going to be descendants, and so they're not going to blend well together. And so then there's another stone, which is the kingdom that's going to last forever, which is the rock that cut out with any human hands, and that's the kingdom of God, and it's going to crush all the other kingdoms, right? It's going to destroy them all, and that one's going to last forever. So he's telling them, you're going to see what's going to happen in the end of latter times. He didn't go into like the rocks being cut out of the mountain, and the mountain represents, and it's probably being cut out of this mountain because this mountain is located in this area. All he said is there was a rock that was cut out without human hands, and so he just addresses, what is the rock? The rock's the kingdom of heaven. That's the important part, right? The rock is that there's a kingdom coming that's going to last forever. He didn't go into trying to figure out what all those kingdoms were. He didn't say, oh, the kingdom of silver is this, and the kingdom of iron and bronze is going to be this, and the kingdom of iron is going to be this. He just went into, there's these kingdoms coming. And as we know now, as we can look back, because dream interpretation in hindsight is always much easier, there was the kingdom of silver that came. I think it was the Persians that came after the Babylonians. And then there was the Greeks after the Persians would be the bronze. And then there was iron, which would be the Romans. But the Roman kingdom got split because they pulled so many of the kingdoms in that it never fully adhered. So it was iron and clay together. So even though it looked like it was solid, there was a split in the middle and it was never fully solidified. One of the things that I just like to throw in here is Daniel 4:19. Daniel's talking to the king again. Then Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, who was appalled for a while as his thoughts alarmed him. And the king responded and said, do not let your dream or its interpretation alarm you. And Belshazzar replied, "My lord, if this dream only applied to those who hate you and its interpretation to your adversaries." Again, I love this just because I love Daniel's heart in this, right? He's been taken from his people. He's been made a captive of Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar's had this dream about the giant tree. And he's told everybody, I'm going to kill everybody if you can't tell me my dream and its interpretation. Because he's probably getting tired of being lied to by his sorcerers and people. And they're all telling him how great his dreams are all the time. And he's like, I want you to tell me the dream. And I want you to tell me what the interpretation is. And so Daniel comes before him, and his heart for this, and when he's telling him, is I wish I could give this interpretation to one of your enemies and not you. But this is what the Lord says. So when we're interpreting dreams, we need to remember this is just like anything else. There's an aspect of tact in this, right? If somebody comes to you and they say, like, I had a dream last night and I was an octopus and there were all these activities in my church going on and I had my tentacles and all the activities and I was doing things and I was touching and moving things around and all these activities. And they wake up and say, God's just showing me that I'm very good at multitasking. And you know that what the dream is telling them is that they're operating in the spirit of Jezebel because they feel like they have to touch and control everything. It's probably not good to say, oh, you're operating in the spirit of Jezebel. If you have a relationship with them and there's favor, then sure, be very upfront. If there's not relationship and favor, it may be better to use some tact in this and say something along the lines of like, you feel like you have to control and have to have your hands in everything. But God's saying that you don't have to touch everything, that he's got people that are set up to take care of all these different areas that you feel like you have to control or they're all going to fall apart. You're still hitting the point of the dream, right? They feel like they have to control and touch everything and manipulate everything without, telling some stranger you're operating in spirit of Jezebel, right? Use discernment. The same thing is like prophetic words. Sometimes you get revelation. You'll look at people, you'll hear God say things and he will reveal things to you. And you'll see that people are doing things that are contrary to their creative purpose. It's not always the point that you have to tell them what they're doing that is against their creative purpose. Sometimes it's better to ask God, so what is their creative purpose, and speak that to them. Speak something that's completely contrary to the thing that you're seeing, but you're speaking truth of what God's heart is for them in the moment, instead of just revealing their sin in front of everybody. We're going to get into dissecting a dream, and part of it's going to be about summarizing it.